Well, what a day. Snake tracks, harriers, birds sort of drifting over the dunes, the sight of the Indian Ocean and bagpipes and incredible welcome dancing, singing, drumming, poetry. And now we have just watched the sun go down and the full moon rise out of the Indian Ocean. Just beautiful. But if I look to the south, I can see the lights at the very northern end of an island partway down the east coast of Oman called Masirah Island, and we're heading to Masirah in the next couple of days because Masirah is home to some significant populations of turtles, and Oman is internationally important for the turtles that live here. And the Environmental Society of Oman are doing a lot of work with regards to looking after those turtles and working with the local communities. And recently I caught up with a fantastic Omani girl called Rabab Al Lawati, working with the Environmental Society of Oman, who's a bit of an expert at working not just with the turtles themselves, but working with the local community to mitigate the impact of human behaviour on Masirah to ensure that turtles have a sustainable future.
So thank you first of all for the introduction. My name is Rabab and my role at ESO is the Conservation Outreach Coordinator. So I work within the Research and Conservation Department on a variety of research and conservation projects, such as those focusing on whales and dolphins, raptors, particularly the Egyptian vulture and the lappet-faced vulture, as well as marine turtles and frankincense trees. So it's a nice mix and match of different projects in addition to both work in the office as well as field work every now and then.
Yeah, sounds heavenly to me. It's great, but you've got a really broad range of topics that you're responsible for there, which is fantastic. And outreach is a real critical part of what we're trying to do on Jewel of Arabia, is trying to engage with as many young people as we can to help them appreciate and understand the incredible biodiversity of Oman and some of the challenges it faces, as it does everywhere in the world, really. And so just thinking about turtles now, my first question would really be, because I've lived in Oman for a few years, I'm not aware of there being many turtles on the bit of coastline that faces the north towards Iran, and I'm not aware of there being quite so many turtles much further south towards Salalah, but maybe I'm wrong in that. But there does seem to be a concentration somewhere between Ras Al Had and Ras Madraka. There seems to be that east coast bit, and especially around Masirah Island and places like that. Well, why is that? Why are they found there, or are they found in other places in Oman and I just don't know about it?
Yes, so you're correct in that this area has quite a dense concentration of green turtles in particular. And we have different species of marine turtles in Oman, and they occur in varied distributions. But the reason why that area is so important and popular for the turtles is due to a unique blend of physical, environmental, and geographic factors that make these areas ideal for feeding and reproduction for the marine turtles. So, for example, one of these factors is sand characteristics such as the permeability, color, as well as grain size. So the sand has to have just the right level of permeability to seawater to allow for air circulation within the nest. And this prevents the nest from becoming too moist or too dry to allow for the optimal aeration and soil moisture for the hatchlings to actually develop and then hatch.
Gosh.
And another factor is beach environment. So if you have natural slopes, it will offer some natural protection from waves and storms and flooding, minimizing the number of nests that are actually washed away when these environmental conditions occur. Whereas if you have a flatter beach, the nests on the beaches might be more prone to being washed away. And so that's in terms of the physical environment on the beaches. But another very important piece of information that might influence these turtles is the distance between mating grounds and foraging grounds. So if you have a very high quality foraging ground near a mating ground or a beach where turtles come to nest, then you're more likely to have turtles, females in particular, migrating between these two areas, and therefore you might have more females nesting on the beaches, more eggs, more hatchlings, and over the long term, it will become a popular area for the nesting of marine turtles. So really, it's about finding that sweet spot between all these different factors that make a certain spot so popular. So Ras Al Had, Masirah Island, these are two of the most important areas for green turtles and loggerheads, respectively, in Oman. And it's due to these different habitat preferences and nesting requirements, which also vary by species.
Gosh, as always, much more complex than I initially thought. It's
Yes.
absolutely fascinating, but it all, all makes perfect sense. So you mentioned a couple of species there, loggerheads and green turtles. So that's two species. I mean, are there other species along the coast that one might see here in Oman?
Yes, so actually out of out of 7 species that are found globally, we have 5 in Oman. And one of them, the leatherback turtle, which is the largest species found in the world and in Oman, it doesn't actually nest on our beaches, it only visits our water for foraging. But we have 4 other species that nest along various areas of the coastline, and those are the green, as you mentioned, the loggerhead, the hawksbill, and the olive ridley. So they vary in distribution, and the only place in Oman where you can find all 4 nesting within the same location is Masirah Island, but obviously at different beaches and at different times of the year.
Yeah.
So each one of them has a slightly different season. What's also very interesting is that the seasons can slightly vary depending on the location. So you'll find green turtles or loggerheads that are nesting in one particular area might have a slightly different nesting season in another area.
Fascinating. So that's not necessarily weather dependent, is it? Because the weather's fairly constant, isn't it, and standard? Or does that vary a lot throughout Oman as well? Does the Kharif, the monsoon, play a part in that, do you think?
It would play somewhat of a role, yes. I mean, Masirah is also influenced by the monsoon, and I'm sure it influences the currents. Sometimes you get humidity and rain, so it does play a role to some extent, but we haven't exactly researched these specific factors in particular.
Fascinating. And so of those species, what kind of numbers are you talking about today? And what are the trends? You know, looking back, because I know you as a society are very active in doing all sorts of survey work, and so I suspect you've been looking after these incredible animals for many years. So what's the story? What's happening? How many are there, and what are the challenges? What's happening to the numbers first of all?
So, as with marine turtles found globally, they are mostly threatened with extinction. So 6 out of the 7 species of marine turtles found around the world are listed as threatened on the IUCN Red List for Threatened Species, which means that they all face a high to an extremely high rate or risk of extinction in the wild. And the turtles in Oman are no different, unfortunately. So what we see is that there are a variety of different natural and anthropogenic threats that turtles face both on land and in water. And it's all related to their life cycle. So obviously the turtles need both the land to lay their eggs, for the eggs to hatch, and then they go to the water where they spend most of the remaining part of their life until they need to return to the beaches again to nest. So some of these threats that we have, starting off with on land, on the marine turtles nesting and hatching grounds, some of the more natural threats is predation by foxes and feral cats. And you might think of it as natural predation, but actually the number of feral cats that we have nowadays is not so natural anymore, and that influences the natural ecosystem balance that we once had. Climate change is also an impact, and the associated cyclones on nesting beaches. So as we mentioned earlier, that does play a role in the washing away of nests if we have a cyclone or a flooding event. And it can also cause beach erosion, and so it might impact beach quality and the ability of a turtle to nest on that beach in the long term. And one of the really interesting things about marine turtles is that the temperature of the nest actually influences the sex of the hatchlings that will come out. So if you've got higher temperatures within the nest, then you will have more females. And if you have cooler temperatures, you will have more males. And if the temperatures fluctuate between higher and lower temperatures, then you'll get pretty much like a 50-50% ratio of hatchlings. And now with climate change and global warming, we're actually finding hotter sands, which means that we get more female turtles. And so over the long term, this can make it difficult to sustain sea turtle populations because there won't be enough males. And this isn't something that we've researched in particular in Oman, but we've seen it from other case studies around the world. Looking at human-caused pressures, we have some recreational activities on beaches, such as camping and bonfires, as well as driving on nesting beaches. So driving can result in the direct killing, obviously, of turtles by crushing them, but it can also create these tracks on the sand that make it sometimes harder for hatchlings to be able to crawl their way towards the ocean once they hatch. One really big issue is entanglement in waste, such as ghost gear, which is also known as abandoned, lost, or otherwise discarded fishing gear. And so this is a problem both on land and in water, because obviously the turtles get entangled and then they may be able to free themselves or they may not.
And you're telling me all that because, I mean, just going back to the numbers and the trends, so are the populations of all of these species declining in Oman?
So they're all threatened, but in terms of decline, I would like to highlight one particular species that we know for certain is declining, and that's the loggerhead turtle. So we actually conducted a 20-year study between 1985 and 2016, and what we observed is a 79% decline in the nesting activity on Masirah Island. And so this makes it such a massive decline, and it also makes this population of loggerhead turtles one of the highest conservation priorities for sea turtles in Oman. So it's an unfortunate truth, and the decline is still continuing on. So it's very important that we put the right conservation management practices in place to at least stop this decline and try to recover this subpopulation of loggerhead turtles.
Yeah. So what can you do as a society to try and arrest that decline and help them stabilize and recover?
So I think one of the most important things to start with is awareness raising. And that's one of the things that ESO has been working on, community engagement campaigns to target different members of the community, schools, and so on, to raise awareness about the threats that sea turtles face and to advocate for sustainable management practices. So it would really help if everybody is aware of these threats so that whatever the community can address can be addressed. For example, light pollution is a massive issue to marine turtles, and there are some very simple things that we can do that would mitigate this threat and actually lead to more turtles being able to make it out to sea. And so just raising awareness about the threats and then therefore what we can do for each threat, it would really help.
Yeah.
So for example, in the case of lighting pollution, we can actually retrofit existing lights for houses that face the beach to more wildlife certified lights that don't disorient the turtles as much. So the problem with lighting pollution is that usually both nesting females and hatchlings, they use the brightest points in the horizon to guide them towards the ocean, considering that they normally nest or hatch at night. And nowadays, with so many sources of artificial lighting, such as from houses, street lamps, and so on, the turtles often get disoriented and they head inland instead of towards the ocean, where they face additional threats such as dehydration, predation, getting run over by cars. And so that reduces the number of turtles that are able to go towards the ocean.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
And you mentioned local communities there. Obviously, I would imagine that they are key to these poor turtles having a sustainable future, aren't they? So what work do you do with the local communities? Are there any examples of good projects that have really been a success that you can talk about?
So we've had different projects and activities over the years. We've had football tournaments, festivals. We've also had some work with the Omani Women's Association, so it's really varied across the years. We've also engaged with fishermen, trying to advocate for more sustainable fishing practices, disposal of fishing nets, and also how to release a turtle safely in case you find it entangled in a fishing net and it's still alive and you're able to rescue it. And more recently, we completed a community engagement campaign across the whole of Oman. And we engaged with over 3,000 students from different areas. And so this was a big part of what we're trying to achieve. In addition to that, we've also developed some awareness materials, both for the general public, and then some of them are more targeted towards children, and they're available in both Arabic and English. So these are some of the things that we're trying to give back to the community, but I still think that there's a lot more to be done.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a multipolar approach, really, isn't it? I mean, so obviously you're doing a huge amount of diverse things and a lot of creative thinking going into engaging with the local communities. What role do you think tourism and eco-tourism plays in the future and the present challenges for turtles?
So I think tourism has a promising role in a sustainable future for Oman's turtles. As responsible, eco-conscious tourism can raise awareness but also provide additional funding for marine turtle conservation. And people are always looking for fun activities that connect them with nature. And so I think it would be really good. But I would like to highlight and emphasize the importance of the words sustainable, responsible, and eco-conscious if we really want to find the right balance between marine turtle conservation and tourism or ecotourism. So, for example, referring back to the point on lighting pollution, if we are to look at tourism on Masirah Island or elsewhere in the country and we want to build hotels, resorts, all kinds of different additional infrastructure, it's very important for us to make sure that they're in the best interest of turtles. So we need to make sure that they're not built on turtle nesting beaches, that they follow the coastal setback guidelines, and that the lights that are on these buildings are actually wildlife certified to minimize the impact on turtles as much as possible. So in summary, tourism activities just need to come hand in hand with turtle conservation so that we can build a future where both the turtles thrive and our local communities are happy.
And that's so win-win, isn't it? And they don't appear to me to be huge costs involved in that. But you mentioned 2 or 3 times now wildlife-friendly lighting.
Yes.
What's that all about? How's that different to a normal strip light then? How does it work? What's different?
So there's a variety of different characteristics or specifications that make a light wildlife certified, and there's all kinds of different guidelines that are coming up now. So basically the wavelength is different in a wildlife certified light. There's less of those blue and green lights in a wavelength, and there's more of the amber color, which is less sensitive to turtles. In addition to that, some of these lights can be shielded. So lighting pollution is a big problem nowadays. If you've got a light bulb and it's unshielded, the light basically spreads out in all directions. And what we're trying to do is shield the light and redirect it to only the area that you need it in. And so that would minimize how much light actually goes out upwards into the sky and to where turtles might be able to see them, as well as other wildlife such as birds.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of different factors of keeping it shielded, keeping it low, keeping it at the right wavelength, and then only keeping it where you actually need it. So we have a lot of wastage these days where we have so many lights that we don't actually need. We tend to keep them on for a long period of time, even when we're not there. So timers are also useful. And just really looking at the process thoroughly before putting in a light.
Many years ago, I paddled a kayak around the coast of Oman, and I remember seeing turtles the size of dustbin lids floating around in the water. Sometimes they're utterly enormous, some of them. They're so incredibly graceful when they swim under your kayak, and they really are amazing swimmers, aren't they? But those animals that I see, just tell me a little bit about the I suspect all the species are different, but just tell me a little bit about the basic life cycle.
Yeah. So I guess looking at the life cycle, if we start out with the mating of the male and female at sea, that usually happens in the mating grounds, and then the female will migrate to the nesting beach, and she will lay her eggs. And from there, the eggs might take some time, about 2 months, to incubate and then hatch, and then they make their way towards the ocean. And for the first couple of years, they actually just drift in the open ocean. And we don't actually know what happens with their movements in ecology, which is why scientists often refer to this period as the lost years. And then as they mature, around 10 years or so after, of growth and development, the juveniles then move to coastal foraging areas. And then migration occurs, and mating also takes place along these migration routes and coastal waters adjacent to nesting beaches. And then once the turtle reaches its age of maturity, it will go to the beach and lay its eggs. And you might wonder, well, when does a turtle actually reach maturity? And the answer is that it varies by species. So for example, the green turtle reaches maturity at 40 to 50 years, whereas the olive ridley reaches maturity at 15 years, which is considered to be an early age compared to other turtles. And the age at which a turtle reaches maturity influences when it will return to its natal nesting beaches. As for how often, it really depends again. So males, they typically breed every year, whereas females, they breed at intervals of between 1 to 4 years, depending on the species. And then, given that it's a breeding year for that female turtle, she will come to nest on the beach between 1 to 7 times. Again, it depends on the species. And at each time she comes to the beach to nest, she will lay about 100 eggs. So you'll get hundreds of eggs per female per season, given that it's a breeding season.
Yeah.
And then after the female lays her eggs, she then returns to the feeding grounds and reunites with the males. And then the process repeats all over again.
Incredible. Of those hundreds of eggs, is there an estimate or a percentage survival or likelihood of actually those hatchlings making it down to the sea safely? There must be a huge drop-off rate, I would imagine.
So yes, there is an estimate, and the estimate is that for every 1,000 sea turtle hatchlings, only one of them actually makes it to adulthood. So that's the estimation. But we also have to go back and think about, from the eggs that are laid, how many of them hatch? And from those that hatch, how many of them actually make it to the ocean? And from those that make it to the ocean, it's estimated that 1 in every 1,000 turtles make it to adulthood. So they face various challenges at every single phase of their life cycle.
Yeah, incredible. And just, you're mentioning one of the 1,000 chances there, but in a normal year here in Oman, how many turtles are nesting? Is there a number that you could put on that, or?
So in the past, considering we highly focus on the critically endangered loggerhead turtle, we used to record about 30,000 nesting females per year. But after that 79% decline, it's come to around 11,000 nesting females per year. So these are the numbers that we have in terms of the loggerhead turtle. As for the other species, I don't have a particular number in mind.
Yeah.
So we'd need to refer probably back to the scientific research and publications that we've got.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place for us to end, actually, is just to talk about that scientific research, because the other thing you just mentioned, under 1 to 100,000, is that they migrate, and the females will go back out to sea, and they might go out to the feeding grounds. How do you know where these areas are, and how do you know where these incredible animals move to? What's the science that a person like you or someone working for ESO would use to try and map the movements of these turtles?
So I think one of the most important resources that we have these days is satellite tracking devices. So these are basically small transmitters that are attached to the turtle's shell without harming them. And then they transmit signals to satellites and transmit information about where the turtles are. And so from that, you can find out about where they're going, their movement patterns, and using other information that you have about these environments, you are able to gather some information about their critical feeding, mating, and nesting habitats. In addition to that, the research that ESO is doing in more detail is basically nesting track surveys. So our field assistants, which are based on Masirah, they go out in the morning, at the very early hours of the morning every day, and they look at the tracks that the turtles have left behind. And based on the tracks, they're able to identify the species of turtle that has nested, keeping in mind the nesting season as well. And then, depending on the track as well, they're able to find out whether the turtle nested or not, and whether she successfully laid eggs. And then they're able to see where she returned to the ocean. And then if you collect that information for each kilometer of beach where you know the turtles nest, for 20 plus years, you're able to see the changes over time. So there are many different ways, basically, to collect information. It really depends on what source of information that you want.
Yeah, no, that's very clear. And just into, because people always like numbers. I mean, it's how far, what are the greater distances that these turtles are known to travel once they've left a beach in Oman? Do we know, or do they go 20 miles away or 200 miles away? Are there any records of that?
They are known to take long-distance migrations, but as to how many miles or kilometers, I haven't got an exact number in mind.
Yeah.
But I do know that it varies by species and by subpopulation.
Yeah.
So the turtles in the North Indian population, for example, the Northwest Indian population that we have in Oman for some of these species, they might travel different distances to those that are found globally.
Yeah.
So it really depends.
Yeah. Great. Good. Well, listen, I've no doubt we will see a few more on our journey of the Jewel of Arabia. But Rabab, thanks very much for that, because you've added a lot of interesting knowledge to what little knowledge we possessed at the start. All that be said, but absolutely fascinating, and good luck in all the really important work that you're doing.
Thank you very much for having me here today.